Executive Director, TOI Online, author, and columnist with The Times of India, with more than 2 decades of experience in lifestyle journalism. She's also the director of Write India, which has now become the world's biggest movement for crowdsourced writing.
Good afternoon. I'm here today with two wonderful ladies, wonderful human beings, and accomplished women in their own right, who, despite all odds, have gained a success in their fields. When I say despite all odds, you will wonder why despite all odds. Because odds, I feel, don't always come from a place of adversity. Sometimes the odds come from a place of privilege as well. And having grown up in households where they've had legendary, iconic parents, both of them, Meghna Gulzar as well as Shweta Bachchan, I don't know whether it must have been, the most difficult thing for them to carve a niche for themselves. Most of us would believe that it must have been a cakewalk, but I'd like to hear it from them. Meghna, would you like to start?
Um, so having an actor as a mother and not choosing acting as a profession made things easy, because one didn't have to think about living up to any kind of standards or benchmarks or um, equaling something that my mother had done. Becoming a filmmaker was a whole different story, because there was constant comparison to the filmmaker that my father was. To top it, my sensibility was not really mainstream commercial. And the times were very different when I started. I'm talking about 18 years ago. It was difficult. It was difficult to get my first film greenlit, which no leading man wanted to do, because it was perceived that there is really nothing for a man to do in that film. It's about two women who decide to have a child. Um, it wasn't even received very well. I mean, I think most people tell me today that it was ahead of its time, and so be it. You know, one would rather be ahead of time than be outdated and lagging behind. Um, it was a tough 15 years before Talwar came along, but I will always be grateful to it, because my perspective now is what it is because of those 15 years of difficulty and struggle.
And so now after Talwar and there is no looking back at all. But it was never easy for you, was it? Just because you were Gulzar Sahib's daughter and Rakhi ji's daughter. It wasn't easy. It wasn't as if you just got accepted because of that. It was...
So I've said this even when I was at the film festival in Goa, that I am actually probably a living icon of the fact that nepotism does not exist in our industry. Because my last name, my surname being Gulzar, or my mother being who she is, or my father being who he is, really made no difference in getting me stars for my film, or getting me a producer, or making my film a success. It didn't. When my films worked, they worked because of the film, not because of what my father's name was or who my mother was. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have been, you started off as a journalist, you were a freelance writer. And
For the Times of India.
Yes, for the Times of
Yes.
India. And you also written poems. You do write poems still, but you write in English, so they are very different from your dad's poems. And you make beautiful films now. And like we said, after Talwar and Razi, there's been no looking back, and we are looking forward to your films. But today you are here as an author. You're here as an author. Both of you are here as authors because of your books. Your book on your dad, which is in its 4th edition. The 4th edition has just come out. And it's been doing very well. It shows us a side of Gulzarji that we didn't know at all. We've never, the little things that never get spoken about outside the family. And there are very interesting incidents in there which we will just come back to. I just want to put the same question to Shweta first. Being the daughter of Amitabh Bachchan and Jaya Bhaduri, how was life for you as a child? Was it a struggle or was it a cakewalk?
Hello. Thank you for having me here. And I just want to say on the onset, it's a huge honor and pleasure to share the stage both these wonderful women. We've grown up together. And okay, so I think my trajectory will be very different from from Meghna's.
That takes a little getting used to because that's not what she calls me, and I was not going to let her call me what she actually calls me on this platform.
Well,
So
I think the audience knows that already. Everybody knows your pet names.
I asked for permission and she said no, and I'm not going to mess with her. Um, it was a my childhood was actually a very privileged but a very protected childhood. From the onset, I had absolutely no inclination for movies, and I think that helped. I didn't even like to visit sets. I I think I was probably 10 before I saw my first Hindi film that featured my father, because um, I just felt he was always getting beaten, and there was I couldn't differentiate between the parent and the actor. I don't think what I am starting to do with my life right now has anything to do with the film world and movies. So in that
Not
sense,
unless you make a film out of your book.
which I would not direct or produce. So again, nothing, or star in. So nothing to do with movies. I have a lot of respect for the profession, but I also feel that there's a temperament, there's a certain kind of person that you need to be in this profession. I am not that person. I don't have that. I just don't have what it takes. And I prefer my stories to be written. And so for me, it's a very different, it's a very different road I've taken. There will always be comparisons, and that's all right. Um, but thankfully, none of my parents have written a book, so it's not as harsh as yours. Yes, but I don't think what I'm attempting to write or put out there is of that level of what my grandfathers wrote. So I think I get cut a little bit of slack. But yes, of course, when you're related to someone who's famous, you're expected to be of a certain um, level, and I think maybe I'll disappoint, but it's my journey, and I'll learn along
Not
the
at
way.
all. And I think your father is incredibly proud of you, as we all know. And you are not just an author. You've authored your first book now, but you have also been, you've modeled for a bit also. Well, at least for a magazine or something, just for some pictures. You have a great interest in environment, and you have been picking up projects over there. And now you've started a fashion label as well. So you've been doing all these things. And what made you think of writing fiction, Paradise Stars?
Um, I've always written. It's always been something that's been personal and private. Never really written and put it out there. Once my kids, both my children are now grown up and in boarding school and college away from India, so I had a lot of time on my hands, and I felt very lonely and sort of, I've never worked actively before, and I wanted to do something. And a friend suggested I write a column for a newspaper in Bombay, and that's how it started.
So you enjoyed the process of writing, did you?
Yes.
Writing a column is very different from writing a
Yes.
novel.
Yes, it is.
So what difference did you find between the two?
First of all, there's a lot more. You have to have an entire story. You have to plot it out. There has to be a lot more structure. A lot of times, and my editor is going to be furious when she hears this, that a lot of times it would be the night before and I'd just be on my computer all night writing my story. You can't do that with a book. And also there are a lot more people who read it. And it's out there and available to a lot more people. And that's very scary. But it's out there, and,
It's done, it's out there, and you should be very proud of it.
Yes, I mean, it's always nice to try. and then try again. That's what I've learned from my father's story and my mother's story and my brother's story. So I think that's where I'm coming from.
Yes. Meghna, for you to have written a book was not such a surprise, really, because you had been writing and also, scripting movies. You have done that, and so the next stage was a book, and that book came from a space of deep love, the love of a daughter for her father. So, when you brought out the recent edition, the fourth edition, which has just come out, it's been 10 years since the book has been out. 14 years since the book is out. So you made certain changes in the fourth edition. Has there been, apart from chronicling the life and works of Gulzar Sahib, apart from that, was there a change in the dynamics of the relationship between the daughter and the father? And did you add stuff about that? I would like to hear that.
So I didn't so much change the previous edition, but I added. I covered the last 14 years from the last edition to this one. Two very significant things, according to me, happened in the last 14 years. My father went from being a father to a grandfather. And he was kind of reliving my childhood with my son and doing exactly the same things that he was doing with me. So
Not
life,
plaiting his hair, of course, like he used to do yours.
no, but pretty much a lot of the other things. And so it was a nice circle that had been completed. Um, and the other thing, the other very big shift was that Papa went back to being a writer and ceased to be a filmmaker. He was still a lyricist, but he was not making films anymore because he had so many books in his head. Um, and believe me when I say this, that when I had to tabulate the books that he has written in 14 years, every time I felt that I had, okay, now completed the list, he would tell me that, okay, now, next month this book is going to come out. So over the last 6 months, when I was writing the last 4 chapters, I think 3 books have come out while I was writing 3 chapters of my book. So keeping up speed with him and the work, the amount of work that he does was definitely a challenge. Um, what I liked about this process was that there is a dichotomy here where I am an authority on his life, and yet I'm not an authority on his life because it is so vast and there's so much of it that is beyond me, that has happened while I was too young and not adult or conscious enough to absorb it, and would only learn about it in retrospect. So I thought the best way to approach this book would be from the lens of a daughter. It's not a comprehensive biography which will tabulate and put together his entire life and his works and what he's done. I'm sure there's songs or lyrics that I may have missed mentioning in the book, but it tells you about the person and where that writing of his comes from.
So that's not so important. What is important is it's his life through the eyes of his daughter, and appropriately, it begins at the time of your birth, because before that, you're not supposed to know what happened in his life. And every chapter kind of starts and ends with him, ends with a couplet by him.
Yeah, so again, I think it's partly genetic because he has flashbacks in his films, and I like to jump time in my narrative. So the book is also like that. It's not in chronological order. Um, Rather, I pick phases or themes to, break them into chapters, break his life into chapters. And what I wanted to do was end each chapter with a poem which resonated with the theme of that chapter or what the chapter was dealing with. Some of them are poems which had not been published or are still not published, actually. So it is quite a treat to, suddenly come across an unpublished poem of his in the course of reading the text of the book.
And the title of the book, Because He Is. So why do you call it that?
So the book opens with a poem. It's probably the only poem of mine which will ever get published, which is in the book. And the last line of the poem, the last 2 lines is, I am because he is.
It's so beautiful, yes.
Yeah, so which is why I thought, it lent itself to a nice
It's a
title.
beautiful title. It encourages one to pick it up. And Shweta, coming back to your book, first of all, would you ever write a book about your dad?
So, actually, I think that's one of the reasons I picked fiction, is because I feel so much of my life has been played out in the public gaze. So much of my father's life, the the highs, the lows, his illnesses, his struggles, his failures specifically, and I, j- I just feel that there's a part of him which when you share a parent with the rest of the world, there's a private part and then there's a public part, and I feel somewhere it's, to me, it's important to hold on to that. As a daughter, I want to hold on to that, and it's precious to me. These are my memories, and I would like to just keep them to myself. So I don't think I would like to write about write about any of my family members. Also because I don't think I can be objective. When you love someone unconditionally, it's tough to be objective about them. And then my book wouldn't be true, because no human being is perfect, and there's always another side to a story. So I think it would be difficult to do that. And someone like my father, I feel it would be important to have not just one point of view. You would need to understand someone like that from many different eyes, and I don't think I'd be able to do justice to that. Which is why I didn't want to start writing with something on them. And also, you don't, when you're associated with someone all your life, and your last name is in the spotlight all the time, sometimes you just want to do something that's your own and try and create your own path. And
I can understand. There are some things you want to keep close to yourself and not share with the world, and then you want to do something which is so completely different from it, as your book is. So, in your book, you write about a building called Paradise Towers. I'm telling the audience, not you. You obviously know. And in that building, there are people of various communities living together in that building. And then you go in and very obviously and very deliberately build in some stereotypes. So there is the Bengali man who is very fond of eating food, his wife who is very loud and boisterous and irritating, and there's a daughter, a bespectacled daughter, who loves reading and then looks quite gorgeous when she dresses up in a sari. And then there's the Punjabi couple who loves drinking. So why did you deliberately go in for these stereotypes?
so it's the Bengali man likes shopping for fish, but he doesn't like eating the food his wife cooks. And she's not loud, she's strong. Um, why? I actually don't look at it as stereotypes. I look at it as celebrating particular aspects of different communities. I love that about India. Growing up in Bombay, you actually get exposed to people from different sort of communities. Whether the Bengalis, my own mothers, our mothers are Bengali, so we've had that huge exposure. Punjabis, Maharashtrians, Gujaratis, and I love the way that though everyone has their different quirks or stereotypes, if you will, I love how they all come together and make a city, this vibrant city. And very often, the different aspects of these stereotypes actually help, help with. So it's I don't know if it's something I've seen in Bombay. You you go to, you'll have a Gujarati accountant and he'll be able to sort you out. They have that acumen, they have that knack, that commercial knack. It's just a way of living in a very cosmopolitan city. And I love that. I love that about India. I love that everyone's not the same, and everyone has a certain amount of stereotypes. So it's fun to caricature. It's
The
entertaining to
stereotypes
me.
are just exaggerated eccentricities, exaggerated quirks, and we all love to talk about it. We all love to share that, and it's good fun anyway. So, in the writing of the book, actually, did you follow any inspiration, any books that you read earlier? Or did the story come to you from real life? Are the characters, do they reflect anyone you know in life?
The characters don't reflect anyone I know. My mother kept asking me, "Is this Bengali lady me?" I said, "No, Mama, she's
That's the
not. I,
safest
I
thing to
wouldn't
say
dare
anyway.
do that to you. I mean, I'm not that brave." But no. Um, but yes, of course, I read a quote somewhere is every human being is the sum of the books they've read, the movies they've watched, the lives they've lived. So yes, of course, there have been hundreds of influences. For me, particularly Austen, because she wrote about, a tight, intimate community and everyone was a little eccentric. And I've loved her books and I reread them actually every year. I pick up one Austen book and I reread it. So I think she would be the hugest influence. It would be my life's goal to be able to even write one sentence like she does.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
that's
would say.
wonderful. And I think everybody who's ever read Jane Austen reads and rereads her all through their lives. I do. I know I
Because at
do.
different phases, it means different things to you.
Exactly. So, Meghna, your movies, what is the next movie that you're making? Let us hear about that.
Um, so my next film is on acid violence. Lakshmi Agarwal is an acid fighter. She is perhaps one of the most familiar acid fighters. There are so many in our country, and each one has a very, very traumatic and yet inspiring tale. But Lakshmi is the one who's most known. So, using her life as a lens, I'm trying to look at the entire issue of acid violence, its social implications, the legal problems, um, the loopholes in our law which make the punishment very very light, which makes building a case against the attacker also very difficult. So things like that, yeah.
Your last few movies, they are all a reflection of reality. They are like, picked up from real life incidents. Is that the genre you would like to focus on? And you've said somewhere that you work better with dark subjects.
I think with Talwar, I kind of discovered this dark side in me, and I find comfort in it. It's not a conscious thing. I think it's more a coincidence that all the subjects are somehow true life. But I just feel that real life stories are far more engaging, far more grittier, and also far more identifiable because they're coming out of the society for which we're making the film. So there is already that connect of familiarity there because with Talwar also, everybody knew of that case. They may have had their own perception, but there is already a familiarity with the subject before you even seen the film. So I really feel that that organic connection is something which is very special when you're making a true life film.
Yes, you do that through films, you do that through books, and that is what that relatability, people to be able to relate to and understand that. In your in your childhood, um, I want to I want you to tell us just some one memory of you with your dad, some interesting incident that comes to mind. And Shweta, I'm coming to you after that with the question. You can start thinking.
Um, so this incident does appear in my book, but I think it is so profound because when I was revisiting the book, I read it and I kind of reminded myself that I must never forget this because now I am a parent as well. It's such a great example of parenting. While I was writing the book, my father asked me, "Do you remember me ever asking you or saying this phrase to you, आप झूठ बोलते हैं?" Do you remember me saying that to you ever in your consciousness? And I actually thought about it for quite some time, and it's a fact that I could never remember a single moment where he had said to me, "आप झूठ बोलते हैं." And the reason for that was this incident which he told me that I was small, I used to go for swimming, and there were two places we could go for swimming. One was the Sea Rock Hotel, and the other was the Centaur Hotel near the airport. And there was some miscommunication, and my father thought I'm going to Sea Rock, but the driver took me to Centaur. And then he was afraid that he's going to get a firing, so he told my father that बेबी ने बोला उधर लेके जाने के लिए. And I hadn't. And when he asked me that you told him to take you to the other hotel, and I said no, and he said, "Aap jhoot bol rahe hain." He said, "I saw the hurt and the betrayal in your face. And I swore to myself that I will never want to see that emotion on your face again." So he never asked me that question again in my life.
So he believed in you always.
Which
That's
is
beautiful.
putting
So
that
beautiful.
kind of faith in a child. I must have been all of 7 years old, 7 or 8 years old.
And such a beautiful kind of a relationship
Yeah.
with your own father must have made you into a wonderful mother, I'm sure.
Oh no,
You
I,
must
I, I
loved-
have a long way to go to live up to him as a parent. I'm not as kind and patient at all. At all. Yeah.
And I read a quote somewhere, your dad's quote, saying that, what is important to give to your children is not the privileges of money and, good stuff that you give, material stuff that you give them in life, but it is the attention and the care and the values that you teach them. And that's very
It's the
important.
time. Nothing is more precious for a child than their parents' time. And he's lived by that. Their time and their respect. This is something he always said, that parents should not assume that just because they're older they know more than their child. If the child is 1 year old, you are also a 1 year old parent.
I just
You-
love that. I mean,
yeah.
and it's such a revelation if you
Yeah.
think about it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he's always been on the same level as you. Even when you were a 1 year old or a 2 year old, he could relate to the 1 year old because he thought he's a 1 year old parent.
So he wrote books for me on my birthday. Every year till I was 13, he was writing a book. And the first book was actually in Totli Zaban. The way a child speaks. The whole book was written like that. And it was talking about how a child is exploring the world and how it interprets the things it sees around, and it's so different from the way an adult processes it.
What a wonderful kind of loving. I'm sure Shweta is full of such stories also. So Shweta, tell us something about your memories with your dad.
There's so many. Um, but I do remember, when I was very young, he was working round the clock. My father was working round the clock, and but so he would come home when we were asleep, and when we woke up, he was not. He was already out at work. But one time I think he was filming Amar Akbar Anthony, and I think he rarely ever came home in costume. But I think he was shooting a song from Amar Akbar Anthony where he was dressed as a Catholic priest. It was a long white robe, and whenever he got home at night, he'd come into our bedroom, and he'd sort of run his hands through our hair, give us a kiss on our forehead, and I think I may have woken up, and I think I saw this sort of almost like a specter, and I I think I was very, very afraid, and I think I may have said something to my mom that and then later I was told that it was my father, but so that was one, and then there was one episode, actually. It was with his accident during Coolie. We were all. It's very common when your parent is acting that, if the children have a holiday, they join you wherever you're. So this was in Bangalore. My brother and me were playing, and I remember the doorbell ringing of our room, and my father was carried in, sort of almost hanging off these men who brought him in, and I think my brother jumped on him, and he sort of screamed out loud, and my father never screams. He has a huge tolerance for pain. We didn't know what was going on, and the next morning we woke up to an empty room. No one was there. My mother called and said, "We're at the hospital," and we were very young, and she said, "I'm going to send someone to get you, and you come there." And I remember sitting next to my dad at St. Catherine's, and he loved mishti doi. So it was very, he would always finish a meal, and then we'd have mishti doi. And there was a particular place in Bangalore that had he loved the mishti doi from there. And it was just lying near his bedside, and he was in a lot of pain. We didn't know how serious it would go on to be. And I kept, I was wondering, why isn't my father having his favorite dessert? I was very young. I think I was maybe 7 or 8. I was very young. And I said, Papa, have the dessert. And he said, no, these are for you. You have them. But he was writhing in pain. And I think it affected me so much because what went on to happen with him, we nearly lost him. It was a frightening time for, very young children who didn't know. And then you go to school and people say, oh, we read in the papers that your father's dying or he's going to die. And then we had to ask my mother these questions. And sometimes have to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance and stuff like that to meet him. And he couldn't talk to us, he couldn't walk, he had to relearn all those things. I know even today, when they say have some mishti do, it's the first, it's my immediate memory, and I just can't, because I've never seen my father in that kind of pain where normally your parents protect you from the bad sides, and I've had a very protected upbringing. And it's the first time I saw him in that kind of, and never again have I ever seen him in that state. So for me, that has always been my, my deepest memory. It's where it's affected, I don't know, it's affected.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing those memories. I've got goosebumps here, really, you guys. Thank you so much. I think we move to another subject now, lest we all get emotional here. So, yeah, let's talk about your children. Like, what are the values that, Meghna, you think are most important to teach to your child? And do you have anything in mind for what you would like him to do as a career?
No, I don't think I want to chart his life out for him. I just want him to be a good human being. The only thing we can instill in our children is kindness and honesty and integrity. It is difficult in the climate that we live in to have these qualities. They've become very lofty ideals now, unfortunately. But that's what we aspire to. He like I was when I was growing up. There were film offers which came my way. I was never inclined to be in front of the camera, but my parents had no objection. Not my father, not my mother. All they said was finish your education and then do whatever you want. So that if in your creative pursuit you don't succeed, you at least have your education to fall back on. And that's the only thing I will tell my son as well.
So there was never any pressure on you to prove yourself, to get into a particular field. It was just left to you.
Completely. Yeah.
Shweta, what are the values that you think are the most important to impart to children?
Well, of course, the basic values, honesty, being a good human being. But for me particularly, what I would most wish for my children is for them to have a full and a complete life, a free life. I didn't really have that growing up because you're always having to watch and weigh, and you can't really do what you want. But for both my children, Navya and Agastya, I would like that they go out there, they make mistakes, they fall on their face, they get back up, and they're able to do that and know that I'm always there for them. And to, if they want to take a year traveling, they should do that. I don't want to ever pressure them as a parent. I don't want them to ever feel you have to live up to a certain expectation. And I don't want them to live I don't want them to grow up the way I did, because I feel there were so many things I couldn't, I want them to fall in love, I want them to be able to have that, and I don't want 100 people having an opinion on it, which I feel I wouldn't have been able to do when I was their age. So I feel the biggest gift I can give them, which is one of the reasons I've sent them away, is I feel that it's important for you to have a normal childhood and explore life to its fullest.
And the freedom of choice. And today children have so many options. Do you also feel like there are lots of things about their lives and the options that they have that we don't even understand? That we are not adept enough to give them advice on what to do. Do you feel like that about your children?
With me, what I find has happened is that I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. I feel we have a very strong communication. And the reason we have that is I don't judge them. I used to say this is right, this is wrong, and then I stopped. And I said, let them make their mistakes. So when I started doing that, I found that they were a lot more open with me. They communicated with me. So, today when my daughter's changing majors, she'll tell me, oh, I'm changing majors, and I won't judge her for it. I'll say, okay, you're entitled to change your mind. And you realize that, it's not your life to live. It's their life, and they should be able to do what they want to do. And then explain to me a little bit, because their jobs today, whether you're like a blogger or an influencer, these weren't concrete jobs when we were growing up. And so the whole scenario is very different, and they understand it. So with me, I find that my children sort of educate me, and I love it because they're telling me
That's what I meant,
things.
yes.
My daughter's just changed majors to digital technology, and I'm learning about blockchains and coding from her, and I'm like, I'm, I'm still trying to
Beautiful
process
feeling.
it.
It's a beautiful-
Yes, and I'm happy that this is you leave that corridor open, but it's something I think Indian parents need to come to eventually. Is you have to let them be. You have to leave that. You have to let them mess up, and they're messing up.
Yeah.
It's very hard to hold back, but let them do it, and let them be able to then talk to you about it, and be there to help them pick up the pieces, which is, I think, the equation I have with my children. So
And then you're there always with them, for them.
yes, and then they're not.
And they know it.
They respect you, but they're not afraid of you. I don't want my children to be afraid of me.
That's very important. Are you afraid of your dad?
I'm not afraid of my dad, but my mom, yes. he's he's not rigid. He's actually, when I look at him, and I've spent a lot more time with him in the past 10 years than I have in my entire life, and the aspects of him that I notice now, I can notice as an adult. And when I look at him and I wonder what keeps him ticking. I mean, next year he's going to have been working for 50 years. That's 5 decades in an industry that puts a lot of value on youth, and and I wonder what it is that keeps him ticking. And I think it's because he's a sponge. So he will sit there with a 5-year-old kid. He'll sit there with my niece, and he'll listen to her. He's engaging, and he's absorbing, and he's not thinking, I have the answers. He may have the experience, but he never feels he has the answers to everything. He's open to learn, and I think that's what makes them the men they are. They're open to, everyone and everything.
And Meghna, is your dad scared of you? Because he's so... No, I'm asking her if he's scared of her, because he seems, he's so crazy about her, even as a kid, and did so much for her. Maybe if she gets a little upset, he got so upset, he never made the same accusation, and...
I don't think scared is the right word, but I think he's very sensitive towards me, and very, very aware of my emotions. I think that's where it comes from, that he does not want to do anything that I would perhaps disapprove of, or
exactly
something
what I
that would hurt me. So he's very aware and very sensitive towards, yeah, my
So both of you have...
But I just want to say, when we were growing up, so you know how when you go to a birthday party, you're allowed a few treats. You're allowed to have, in those days, there was thumbs up and all that. But you were allowed cold drinks whenever you wanted. And my brother and me would be in awe. We've spent a lot of time together. Our parents have been in a fair amount of movies. My mother ties Rakhi to Gulzar uncle, so we have that. And we've spent a lot of time on, holidays, etc. While our parents were working, we've had a great time. She was allowed to do what she wanted, and my mother was so strict. And my brother and me would be in awe. She's allowed to have gold spot and thumbs up every day, we would say, and they never said no to her.
So I see that similarity now, because where my son is concerned, I'm the rigid one who will be very, very restrictive, and this much time on the iPad and no candy and this and that. And my husband is like, okay, take the iPad because I need to get back on my con call. So I think on set, when we were on outdoors, I think it largely came from there also, that okay, you drink your thumbs up, let me go and make my movie. I think that's where my father was coming from. But um, the good thing was that Jaya auntie was the disciplinarian for all the kids over there. All of them. Yeah.
So, both of you have grown up in a very protected environment, but within the film industry. What kind of changes have you seen over the years, in your growing years, and from then to today, in the film industry, particularly vis-a-vis women? Meghna. And as a woman director, woman filmmaker today, how tough is it?
Um, so I can say there have been cycles. Like when our parents were working together, the female actors in the films, in those films, was not doing what the women do in films today. There was, there was a female character called a vamp. She used to be the sexy siren. She used to be the one who would do the wear the revealing clothes and do the dances and all of that. That character slowly vanished from our films, and our leading lady started doing all those things, the dances, the item numbers, the revealing clothes, and all of that. It's now come back again to where your leading lady perhaps will not do that, will not have to do that. So there is a regard for the female lead of a film which used to be there, then it kind of diminished a little bit. They were objectified to a certain extent. It's coming back to them being regarded with a lot of respect again, is what I feel. And so also that's affecting the stories that we're telling, that stories that talk about women or a woman protagonist are not kind of shunned away. They do succeed now as films.
And as a woman filmmaker, do you find it difficult? Did you find it difficult to find your space there? Do you feel there are certain rigidities still, and men make it difficult for the women to make a name for themselves?
It was when I started out. Like I was saying in my previous session also, that my choice of subject was very unconventional. It was about two women. I was a woman. I mean, there was everything which was, it had non-mainstream written on it, but it was a conscious decision. That has changed now. I think we, very rarely look at things through a lens of gender when we are green lighting a film, or even on a set. I feel a film set is such a gender neutral space, because, like for example, my direction team has boys and girls in it. The girls are not going to do any less work, or they're not going to go and not stand in the sun if the shot requires them to, just because they are girls. We work as equals on a film set. The one thing, and this is not from a perspective of gender, that I have noticed from the time when we were together. So Kashmir used to be a place where all film units went, right? So you would have 3 different film units shooting in Kashmir, and the hotels were only 1 or 2. So all the film units were living together in the same hotel, knocking on each other's sets, eating meals together. I mean, I think all the tables of the restaurant used to get joined and make one long 40-seater table. That camaraderie I miss in our industry today. It's not as congenial and as warm
Why do
as
you think that is?
insecurity, competition. Like she's just finished saying that her father's now been in this industry for 50 years. We don't have, the actors today don't have that long a life today.
Yeah, and the stakes are much higher today.
Yes.
Yes. So you're always fighting to reach that 100 crore club and all that stuff. Whereas at one time, particularly the old timers, they are known to say all the time, it was not the money that we thought about at that time. It didn't matter
No,
so
that's
much to
not
us.
true. They also wanted their silver jubilees and golden jubilees and diamond jubilees. That's what the targets were. Yes. If they say if they didn't want it, they're lying.
But after work, they would sort of, they would sit together. A lot of them would sit and have these musical evenings where they would sing and, play instruments, or your mom would cook for everybody and feed everybody on the set, and, go into the hotel kitchens and say, okay, I'm going to make some Bengali food for everyone. And things like that would happen. My mom would take care of sort of all the children. It was like growing up in one big family.
But these things don't happen at all now.
I mean, you'd know more.
Not as much. Not as much. Now we have something called closed sets.
Oh.
Outsiders are not allowed.
So, Shweta, are you already working on your next book?
I have a couple stories in mind, and I I need to sort of put them to paper now. But I
So
do
are
have
they novels that you're thinking about? Are you thinking about writing short stories at any point in your life?
not short stories. I think I'm going to take the difficult route. Again, fiction novels. So yeah.
So, what are the lessons that you've learned after writing your first book which will help you in your second?
I'm still learning them. It's the process isn't done yet. A lot. I I I, I think my dialogue needs to improve. In fact, that's the first thing my mother said. She said, "This book is very visual, but don't." She said, "You can write a screenplay, but don't ever try writing dialogue." So I said, "Okay, Mama, I'll work on that." That, and it's my first book. I've never really trained. I've never done sort of any kind of writing course as such. So I'm still learning every day. I'm understanding more. I'm looking back on my work. Maybe more detailed, less rushed. So slowly, hopefully.
And there's no better training than writing your book. You've written your own book. It couldn't get better than that. So, do you write every day as a discipline?
I try to, but it's sort of for myself. I sort of try and what I do, and it may not be many lines, but I take a particular incident in a day, and it could be something very simple that I designed something, and I try to describe it in a less ordinary way. I try to sort of give it flavor and in as
This
if I
is
were
all
writing a book.
fictionalized stuff that you write, or do you write like a personal diary
A
and stuff from
personal
your a
diary,
personal
actually.
diary?
Yeah.
All right, that we can't get to see, I'm sure. So, Meghna, do you write your poetry still?
Not as much anymore. Somehow for me, I would turn towards writing a poem when I was affected very deeply by something. And more often than not, the emotion was either extreme sadness or extreme hurt. And that was when I would write a poem. Fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't had extreme sadness or extreme hurt for some time. So I
We
haven't
wouldn't
written a
want that
poem.
for you, but we would love to hear some more poems from you without the sadness and without the hurt.
Yeah.
So the poetry only comes from a place of hurt for you. Yeah, and that's true of a lot of poets, really.
Hurt, and it doesn't need to be personal.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be personal. Like, um, so there was a ship that was that ran onto land near where we lived, near Cart Road, and you could see it, and I could see how that ship actually rusted and crumbled into bits and just went under over time. But till it hadn't rusted and crumbled, visitors would come, people would come to take pictures. They were talking about making it a restaurant. But the minute they didn't want to have any plans for it, they just let it rust in that salty Arabian Sea and just disintegrate. And that kind of it affected me. So I wrote about it. It affected me that our perceptions. I mean, we're a very selfish people. That's what I felt when I saw that happening. So
What about romantic poetry? Do you write any of that?
no, no, no. I'll leave that to my father.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So we are going to invite questions from the audience now. So please go ahead with questions. All right, there's a lady there who wants to ask a question.
Ma'am, both of you come from background which is very well known. So how easy or difficult was it for you to carve out your own individual space?
Um, so I think for me, I can't say easy or difficult. Let's just say it's been a journey, and particularly in the field that I'm in, nothing is easy. and we were saying that in the last session also, it is extremely hard work. As glamorous as the end product may look, it's extremely hard work. So it's been a journey. It's had its ups and downs, but I think from my first film, it was very clear that my sensibility is very different from my father. So the comparisons were all there in the perception of the kind of film that I would make. The minute people saw the film that I made, those comparisons stopped happening because my films were very different. After that, the success and the failure of my films is actually what's been the trajectory of my life. But pressure of being the child of my parents has never been something that I have lived with.
Yeah, good evening. Hi.
She still has
Hi.
to answer. Ma'am, she still has to answer the question. No, please answer the question.
Um, so I'm not in the movie business, and I I've written a book and I'm designing my line. So I don't think it's been tough for me in that way, where I've had to live up to, someone's body of work. But I can't say it's been tough, but I can say that there's certain expectations people have of you because you belong to a certain family, or you're the daughter of someone who's achieved a lot of excellence. They expect you to be as brilliant or achieve that kind of excellence, and it's a very tall order. My brother's in the same industry, and I think he battles that every day in his profession. And so I'm just grateful I haven't chosen that path. But yes, in my personal life, sometimes you feel if you write your first book, I don't know if I feel that it's supposed to be a bestseller just because of who my father is. But it's excellence is not genetically inherited. It's something you work on for years. I mean, my father's been working for 50 years, and I've just started. So, I hope that sort of comes into play when people sort of judge your work, or what you're trying to do. That's what I feel.
Yeah, good evening. I want to compliment both of you first, and I'll begin with Shweta. You were talking of Amar Akbar Anthony, so that is one of my favorite movies. I can watch it like 1,000 times and still watch it when it comes on TV. So I've loved all his movies, and I've loved KBC, though I was never there on it. But please, he has conveyed a lot of hellos to a lot of people on KBC, so please convey that we are finding a big vacuum because that program has gone off the air. And your book, I want to say I've lived in Bombay before my marriage, so I can visualize all the characters, the namunas you meet in the typical ones. I'm going to read your book now. So all the best to you. And Meghna, I want to say I love your movies and I really, really enjoyed. I want to ask you something. In your movie Talwar, you have shown that the servants were involved with the murder, but the Talwars were rearrested and now they have been released. Do you think your movie has influenced that decision?
Um, I would like to believe no. I would like to believe that our judiciary operates free of being influenced or operates free of any kind of biases. Has the film changed the perspective of the audience who had watched it and had a different idea of things? Yes, I think that it has done to a certain extent, but I don't think the judiciary, our judges, particularly the High Court, is what has overturned the judgment of the Sessions Court. I don't think that judicial body is so flippant or irreverent that a film can influence them. I think they also have looked at the facts like we did and processed it with a far more rational and objective mind.
Yeah, hi, Shweta and Meghna. I have a question for both of you. You're both kids of celebrity parents. Now, what kind of message would you like to give parents like us, like me? What did you learn really? One thing you learned from your parents, which you think you can share with us and we can keep in mind.
So, like I said, there is a sense of equality that my parents raised me with. Um, like my father believed that if I was 1 year old, he was a 1 year old father. So there was always talking to me, never talking down, which I think is a very good thing for a child. It's not that I grew up perfect and I didn't make mistakes, but I learned to learn from my mistakes and be responsible for my decisions and choices. That was very important. Um, they did a beautiful balance between one would be the pamperer and the other would be the discipliner. So that also, I think, if a child has the good fortune of having being raised by both parents, there shouldn't be any stereotypical parental roles. They should keep interchanging. Um, the father can mother the child, and the mother can father the child, particularly in today's scenario. These are things that I think is very important for parents to know. Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
And Shweta?
I think it's important for in my growing up, and what my parents actually gave me is a very, very solid sense of family. I know every time I'm hurt or scared, I know I can come back into the family nest and I'll be okay. And that's something I thank my parents for every day, living the lives they've lived, to be able to create that. And I have to give my mother all the credit for this. It takes a lot to kick up a thriving career, sit at home, and entirely devote yourself to bringing up your children, making sure your husband has 3 square meals a day, and not hankering for that fame that you did have. She's given us a strong sense of family, a strong sense of identity. And also, another thing is what the fame and everything that comes with being, my father or the children of my father. You can't take it seriously. You have your face on a newspaper one day, and the next day someone's soaking bhajia oil in it. It's on your face. Literally, they're wrapping and throwing it into the garbage, and you can't take it seriously. And I think that's something that's my brother and me have had ingrained in us, and that's the advice I would give.
Thank you so much.
A very good evening. Please go ahead. All right. Thank you. So that's a friend. Uh, my compliments to Vinita ji first. I heard you yesterday and again today. I think you've done a great job. Two separate questions. Yes, please, for her. Um, Two separate questions for Shweta and for you, Meghna. Shweta, first for you. Your grandfather, Harivansh Rai ji, we marvel at what is his magic with the words. I see the connect between him and your father when your father narrates his work. And that has lived on because of what your father, the way he has narrated it. My question to you is, what is your connect with your grandfather? I would like to know that part. Okay, should I say her question or should I say it later?
Connect in terms of writing or my memories of him, or
Or
how I would
influence?
his influence. So we lived with my grandfather, and he was always busy in his study, writing, as most writers and poets are wont to do. You need to give them a lot of creative space. And we grew up on stories. So every lunchtime, every dinner time, there was a story he would tell us. And on our birthdays, he would write a poem specially for us. That was his birthday gift to us. And it would actually start Priya Shweta or Priya Abhishek, Aapke Janam Din Par. So those are, cherished memories. The kind of my father has actually grown up going to Kavi Sammelans with Dadaji. So the kind of connect he will have with his father's body of work, because he's seen it firsthand, will be very, very different. And the proficiency of the language that he has, because of, growing up with that language spoken in the home every day, I don't think I would be able to, even recreate if I wanted to. My father recites my grandfather's poetry very often at home. Just he'll pick up a book. We're thinking of Dadaji. He'll pick up a book, he'll open it, and he'll sing it the way Dadaji used to sing it. And he's able to do that because he was there when it was being. He knows the way it's supposed to be sung. He has that ingrained in him from when he was a very young boy. We unfortunately were not there for that phase of Dadaji's life. He had stopped going to Kavi Sammelans, and his work was more based at home and sedentary. So I haven't been able to see that live, which is why I always feel my father needs to record these things and so they can live on for posterity. And, whatever we can do as the next generation to sort of promote that, I would be happy to. But there's certain things you cannot tamper with. And I wouldn't even attempt to do that.
For you, Meghna, we've heard a lot and learnt a lot about you and your father and your connectivity, the two of you. Rakhi ji's influence upon you is the missing link as far as I'm concerned. Would you care to say something about that?
No, so she's not missing in my book.
Right. I haven't read it,
obviously.
But I would love to, and I'd love to hear it from you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think for me, what has been most treasured is that in spite of being a child of separated parents, I never felt that I had separated parents. I never felt the absence of one over the other. The grace and the dignity with which they came together whenever it mattered, whether it was school, whether it was functions, whether it was my birthday, whether it was anything. It just felt like as a child I had two homes instead of one. And a large part of that is also because of my mother. Most mothers would, when a child is small and you're separated, you would want to be the one to raise your child because you will think it's important that the child is raised with the mother, which may be right as well, but they always chose to share me. So this is why that when I say that the parenting roles are interchangeable, I'm coming back from my experience as a child. My mother has been both a father and a mother to me. As has my father been. I mean, he's braided my hair, he's got me ready for school, learned to tie chotis actually. So and here's the other thing, like my mother was an actor and at the top of her game when I was born. And she was doing that. We lived in a joint family. My grandparents were there. So there was somebody to look after me when she was out working. But when she was home, she was just a mother. She would check my homework. She would make sure I had my breakfast, eat my dinner. So that realization that your parents are actually celebrities happened very late in life. Because at home, they were just mummy and papa. So, yeah.
Thank you. And please, our compliments to your parents. We admire them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shall I? Yes. I have questions for both of you. As Gulzar ji is a favorite of mine, his movies and songs are very close to me. So may I request you, why don't you make a movie like Gulzar ji has made, like Masoom, Lakri Ki Kathi and all. And I have heard that this song he had written for you when you were a child.
No.
No. I have
So he has not made Masoom. Shekhar Kapoor has directed Masoom. He's only written it.
He has written it.
Yes. He wrote the song specifically for the film. When you say, why don't I make films like my father? I can't because I don't have the life experiences and the perspective that he does. I have mine. So I will make films like myself.
Thank you. And second, Shweta ji, as first of all, I would like to compliment you for your excessively beauty. I have seen you for the first time like this, and I am like my seeing you. You are so beautiful, so much beautiful. I have never seen you like this. I have seen you on screens. So I am like you are daughter of one of the most respected personality of cinema and society. He is the most admired person. My father used to like him. हरिवंश राय जी की कविताएं कौन नहीं जानता है, हमने स्कूल में पढ़ा. और अमित सर की जो कविता की जिस तरह से रिसिटेशन है, we are we have no words to express, and he is a complete man. He is extremely beautiful, not handsome. Handsomeness से बहुत ज़्यादा, and he is a complete man, and he is a complete family man. तो ऐसे फादर की बेटी और इतनी खूबसूरत, then why didn't you go for becoming a film actress?
Thank you so much for the compliment. I don't have the talent that it would take to be an actress. As I said, it's not, people think it's genetic, it isn't. And I really don't have it. And it's not something that appeals to me at all. Somebody has to watch the movies everybody makes in the family and give critical advice. So I think I've taken that role. And
So
I'm
you are
happy.
a family film critic.
Yes.
I
You know
would
this.
love
I
if-
want to ask this question: why is excellence and success expected and taken for granted that it's genetic, but failure is not? Why? Something to think about.
No, I would like to answer if you don't mind. Like
No, I was not asking a question.
I know you were conversing to Shweta ji, but
You know,
I
we
would,
just have
Please,
time for
please.
one last question, so please give somebody else a chance. Yes, let's
Hi.
give him. Let's give him.
Yeah, yeah. Hi, Shweta. Hi, Meghna.
Hello.
First question to Shweta. Based on your background, it's obvious that you'll be heavily influenced by the filmy background because your father and mother. But post-marriage, you have been part of a big business house now. How that has affected you, and whether it is getting influence in your writing also or no. So just your thoughts on that.
Yes, as I said, you are always the sum of your experiences and the lives you've lived and the experiences you've had. My, much like Meghna, while we were growing up, we were kept away from what my father's profession was. Magazines weren't even allowed in the house, so we never really knew. And he never ever came home and discussed movies or wore his costume back home. So we never ever really knew what it was. We knew he went out and he acted, but it was not something that really shaped our youth. It was a very basic childhood. We would go to school, come back, homework, the usuals. Post marriage, I moved to Delhi. So it's a completely different environment to be in. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about, different kind of people, their lives, society in Delhi, how it works. Delhi has seasons. Bombay really doesn't have seasons. And so these things do influence you. Delhi, I feel, celebrates things like Diwali and all with a lot more enthusiasm, I would say, than maybe people in Bombay do. So these are interesting things to see. There's that thing in Delhi where suddenly everyone will change. They'll start putting their warm clothes, taking their warm clothes out of the trunk. It's I find it so quaint and lovely. There's a particular season when people do that. You remove your... So these things impacted me. They formed, my life experiences. Being married into a family, a business family, took some getting used to, because when you come from a family that's artistic, your upbringing is very emotional, and especially if your parents are actors, they read body language and emotion very quickly. So even today, if I'm sitting there, my parents will know if something's not right. Of course, most parents generally do have a fair idea, but they can pinpoint a nuance, because that's their job. They observe people. They're recreating observations, basically. They are not Anthony Bhai, but they are watching someone like that and they're being able to recreate it. So that is different. You may have to say, today I'm not in a good mood, whereas at home, it'll be picked up in half a second without you even having to say it. You're just sitting there and your parent will be able to tell you. So that takes a little getting used to, but then there's a lot more organization, systems, you learn that when you're married into a business family. Whereas when you're in an artistic family, things sort of just happen. You know, you know what I mean. Artists are artists, and things just happen, and everyone's very emotional, and emotion is the guiding force of your life. So moods are very important, I feel. You know, you've done a good day's work, you're in a great mood, you come back, you're brilliant. You've sat, you know, shooting for KBC for 15 hours, you're tired, you don't want to talk to anyone. I feel actors don't really like talking when they get home because they're doing so much of that on set. I feel when they get home, you need to be able to give them space, and only
Even I don't as a filmmaker, because you're doing so much talking on set through the day that, and it's actually unfair to the family.
Yes.
Because they are waiting for you to come and talk to them.
And they want to know how was your day, what did you do, and you get a, maybe you get a grunt, but then, you know, you understand that the man's been sitting for 18 hours filming and talking to so many people. You just need to give him some space, and maybe 3 days later he'll say, oh, this amazing thing happened on set, or, you know. So that's the difference. Whereas in a business family, someone comes home, how was your day, and they can tell you how their day was. So yeah.
Thanks. So, Meghna, first of all, congrats for rolling out such beautiful movies. So,
Thank
there
you.
are some talks going on that you are also working on Sham Manekshaw movie, making a movie on him, and also on the ex-commissioner of Mumbai, Rakesh. Is that true?
Yes. No, so like I said, it's content that draws me. Um, the subject of the life of Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw came to me, and I don't think anybody in their right mind would pass it up. With Commissioner Rakesh Maria, he's an ex-policeman. He was an ex-commissioner of Mumbai. It's basically his case files, which is actually a very interesting perspective to see how crime has changed over the years, from what used to be gang wars to then becoming ISI funded terrorism to then becoming IS. Um, you can tell a lot about the society by the crime that occurs in it. So it's fascinating for me. Yeah.
One last question.
Right.
Can I?
Where,
I've been
they're,
waiting
I'm
for quite
sorry.
long time.
Would you like to meet them maybe later as they sign the books that you buy from the bookshop? Yeah, please. We are through time, and the next panelists would be waiting. Thank you so much. Thank you very much,
Sorry about that.
Meghna and Shweta. It's been lovely talking to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
for a lovely conversation, and thank you. You've been wonderful
Yes,
again.
you have been wonderful.